In yesterday's video, we got a glimpse of what the Kharadron Overlords are like now. They are essentially governed by commerce and ether gold. And today we're going to explore what that looks like as a society and introduce the officers and leaders who make it possible. Now, if you didn't catch it earlier, these skyports are basically giant businesses. All the language and structure and the terms that the battle tome uses to describe how people fit into society are all business terms. Commerce and technology were the saviors in the age of chaos. So we're going to touch on the anatomy of a skyport. And it dovetails really nicely into the leadership and how they kind of fit into this faction. So let's just pick one as an example. You have a skyport, we'll say Barak Mornar, which is my favorite one. The one from the Realm of Shadows. A skyport is composed of many guilds. These are things like workers' unions, sky fleets, so people who like a union based around the ships and piloting them, engineers, flight schools, colleges of technology, things like that. Basically a conglomerate of businesses or mutual interests that unify is what a guild is. The leaders from the biggest guilds come in and they sit on a council seat, and that's really how the governorship of a skyport functions. And which one is in charge, meaning like which guild is the biggest, varies from skyport to skyport, but fundamentally they all operate that same way. Regardless of how different they are in every skyport, there are three big ones that really stand out in every single one of them. The first one being the Nav League, NAV, and these are your navigators, incredibly important for the amount of travel that the Kharadron Overlords do. Because they really are the cartographers, or they map out the way that the skies work. Different pressures at different altitudes, wind currents, obviously mountains and things that touch the sky become very important. They study storm patterns, and they use the current of the skies to kind of expedite travel or circumvent their enemies. And these are complex mathematical calculations that are done on a whim that few can do, particularly while you're in a storm clinging to the side of a ship. Next up are the Ether Chemist Guild. And these are scientists and engineers that focused almost exclusively on the study of ether gold and other kind of alchemical properties. Because ether gold is a substance that's difficult to find and hard to mine, so having someone who can track it, extract it, store it, grade it is incredibly important with how vital that substance is. Now, keep in mind their main focus is on ether gold, but they do have access and study into a lot of other materials like developing stronger and thicker alloys for their ships' hulls, other power sources, things like that. So they really do have a wide variety. It really is just a focus on like chemical science, if you will. And the third one here is the Engineers Guild. Now these are the most mechanically inclined minds of this race. These are scientists and engineers that focus almost exclusively on ships and the development of new engines. These are the innovators of the race, and they focus on bigger, larger, more efficient designs, which also includes new ways to use, store, and transport ether gold, weapons, creations, defenses, things like that. And while Barak Zelfin boasts the largest Engineers Guild, as we spoke about yesterday, every port has a vital one. They're all vitally important. Now, all these guilds work together, of course, for a fee for each one of them to make society happen. So now we're going to dive into the hero units of the battle tome, and we'll see how each guild lends its services to any sky fleet, fleet being just a collection of ships that go out for any reason. And they're going to act as advisors, crews, officers, anything they can do to be of assistance to the fleet as well as rake in personal profit. Now we're going to hammer through these units here. Most of them have very, very little lore individually, but we're going to kind of go through them and talk about why they are so cool. The first up is the Archanaut Admiral. This is the highest level of leadership on the table, the one that we can literally play in the game. Every ship has a captain, but a fleet, meaning a collection of ships, has an admiral. And he is the undisputed leader on the battlefield. They are masters of maneuvers, warfare, commerce, and wealth. They have no ship of their own, but they elect one ship in their fleet to be their flagship, to act as their home base. Now, to become an admiral, you actually have to be chosen by a special council back at the skyport. That conglomeration of guilds has to agree that this person, this Duarden, is the best person for the job to achieve X goal. because they have to be shrewd and practical and efficient and brutal and successful. And part of that is the fact that, much like all Duarden leadership, they don't lead from the rear. They use their wealth and influence to outfit themselves with the finest armor and weapons that money can buy. And so instead of giving orders from a cabin as he kind of coordinates where his ships are, these guys are on the bow pointing at the enemy, directing things from the front. Next up is the Ether Chemist, and then this is the representative of the Ether Chemist Guild. And this is their on-site expert on Ether Gold. It helps make expeditions more profitable and therefore more successful. Again, having someone who is really good at finding and harvesting your vital resource is incredibly important. So he might seem like a side character, but he is extremely vital to the way this faction operates. Now, he's not only an expert, as I said before, in Ether Gold, but in pretty much the chemical properties of just about everything. He can rip the air from enemies' lungs or shoot gouts of poison at them with his little backpack. Next is the Endrin Master. Now, this is the field mechanic from the Endriners Guild. And they're able to strip and reassemble an ether engine mid-battle in the sky, and they keep the fleets moving and flying and attacking. Should anyone try to get near them, they're in for a world of hurt because he has this massive hammer that's usually used for smashing pieces back into place, but of course, it tends to silence any enemies that annoy him. And lastly are the Etheric Navigators. As I said before, from the Nav League Guild, this is the cartographers of the sky, and they make the travel on the winds as safe and efficient as possible. They can even use technology to alter the winds themselves to use against an enemy. And these are really just more advisory roles that really assist the Admiral in making efficient decisions on the battlefield and just traveling and making commerce happen. Now honestly, that's about it for the lore on the leaders. I'll do a special video for a hero that has a name at another time, but why are these characters specifically cool? Well, simply put, there are few books that bring the lore to the tabletop like Kharadron Overlords, specifically in regards to heroes. I really do encourage you to read the Battle Tome for yourself. It has a ton more detail about organizational structure and how each guild fits into society and how leaders are elected and the demands that are placed upon them. It's all very fascinating. When we read about a faction that uses commerce as its lifeblood, we actually get to see all the elements come together on the tabletop, right? You got your Admiral of the fleet, but he needs to have a navigator, needs to pay to have someone help him literally get to the Ether Gold so he can get paid. Okay, well, if you're going that far, you want to have the best chances of getting the most amount of money and profit, so you have to hire an Ether Chemist. And doing all of those things, you're going to, of course, accrue mechanical needs and expenses and that, so you get an engineer. And so you can just kind of see, even just from a cursory glance at the faction, why all these pieces are here and how they all work together. Again, I said commerce sprung in this faction because need breeds opportunity. They're all helping each other, of course for a cost, but they are all working together. And they can't do each other's jobs, they need each other. And they all mutually benefit from it. Each one of these heroes, even though they're kind of getting paid to be there and they have their own thoughts and goals and things like that, they all have their own risk and reward and a market built around their skills. And I just feel like so few races integrate that well on the tabletop. It makes perfect sense to have a full set of leaders in an ironclad on the tabletop, or multiple of a particular type depending on your port of choice. Regardless, these are also some killer models. I particularly love the Admiral. Absolutely gorgeous model. And so seeing that they put this much thought into how the guilds exist and then also work together and how they send representatives and hire each other out is just a really fun, fascinating thing to dig into, and I do encourage you to do the same. But friends, that is all there is on the leadership. There's very few units in this faction, and so these little videos where I cover basically the units, it's going to go very, very quickly. But if you know someone who's getting into Kharadron Overlords, or you yourself interested, go ahead and click subscribe and join along. Either way, I look forward to seeing you in my next lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.